Hi, my name's Greg, broker with Easy Realty, and welcome to this week's podcast, which is on FIRPTA. And I bet you're wondering what the heck FIRPTA is. Well, it's this here. Let's get into it. Thank you very much. FIRPTA is an acronym, of course, and it stands for the Foreign Investor Real Property Tax Act. And the reason we need to know about this is because it could potentially make or break a deal. Okay, so a bit of a history lesson as to how we arrived and came and how FIRPTA came about. So it started a number of years ago where foreign investors would come to the United States, invest some very significant tidy sums of money, and then ultimately cash in on their investments and disappear back to their home country with all the profit. Now, of course, there's one obvious error here, which is that the person who loves to stand up above their parapet at the IRS says, what about our capital gains tax that you owe us? And so this law was introduced in order to prevent that from happening. Now, up until a couple of years ago, there was a mandated requirement that the buyer of a property that's being sold by a foreign investor, let's say it's a vacation home, for example. Airbnb are very common, and VRBO, for example. But if it's being sold by someone that is not a US citizen, the buyer was, until recently, mandated to retain 10% of the sales price of the property. It was recently, within the past couple of years, that's been it raised to 15%. Now, that can have a potential catastrophic event on some of your deals. So remember, it's on the buyer to withhold the money. Now, as a rule, what happens is that at the closing, the title company will retain that now 15% of the sales price and forward it to the IRS. Now, the basis here is that the seller of the property ultimately goes and files their annual taxes, and then the IRS keep the appropriate amount of capital gains tax, taking into consideration any loss or taxes that are owed, and returns that amount then to the seller at a later stage. But remember, it could be several months or many months after the deal is concluded. So I'm going to put in at this point a little link to this particular law where you can read up more about it, because it's something you should keep in the back of your mind. That again, remember that typically there's quite a number of occasions where you've got a foreign national seller and they may not have 15% of equity in the property after all of the closing costs are paid. Because, remember, if there's 6% real estate commission and then other closing costs, there's a general rule of thumb, that's 8 to 9%. And on top of which, you need then another 15% free and clear to be able to forward to the IRS after the sale concludes. And you've got to educate not only your buyers, but also potentially your sellers. Now, there are a couple of exemptions to this rule, and one of which is the fact that there has actually been no capital gain whatsoever. So, for example, a short sale. Somebody comes here, they buys a vacation home, and all of a sudden it goes down in value compared to what they purchased or borrowed against the property. And then ultimately there's no capital gain. That is an exemption that can basically get you out of jail, but that's only one exemption. Another is where you get a foreign national that sells the property, but the buyer wants to live in the property as their principal residence, and the price is less than $300,000. Now again, that could or could not potentially help you. But it's something that you need to keep in the back of your mind whenever you're talking with buyers and sellers, and you come across a client that is potentially a foreign national. Remember, if your client's a buyer, you need to make them aware of this before they go and put their toe in the water, so to speak, so that they know at a later stage when it does come to sell that they have this issue that they have to address. Well, if you're still watching, thank you very much indeed for it's going to conclude another podcast. Next week, we're going to have a look at something which is very important in terms of doing business, finding business, and establishing how deals are going to work. And that is called IMAP. Now, IMAP is an add-on service to the MLS. And next week, I'm going to show you exactly how it can help you all. So until next week, enjoy the weekend and let's make lots of money. It's easy. Thanks for watching.